One thing that has touched on the consciences of people in the West is the Islamic regime's treatment of women. And the last big protest a few years ago was an uprising of young women and young men in response to the death of a woman in custody, a woman from Iranian Kurdistan who was accused of not wearing her veil properly, and she died in custody. What is it? You have direct experience of this, but what is it about women and women's freedom that so terrifies mullahs and Islamist movements, Islamist governments? What in particular is it about women that seems to drive them so crazy?
Just our bodies, I think. And all this mystification of the female body, of sex and sexuality, of stories that were told over centuries before science became mainstream and before the Enlightenment, that even in Europe, we had women as witches and women as this and women as that. But there is, in Islamist theology, is this acute terror of women's bodies. You'll be surprised, the amount of time they spend on what part of the body of a woman is allowed to be uncovered and what part is not allowed. And the most fanatical ones, which are the ones who rule over Iran, have come to the conclusion everything has to be covered. And I remember in the 1980s when I used to be a part of those discussions where the so-called moderate Islamists would say you should bare the hands and the face and the feet beneath the ankles. And then counter-theologians came and said, well, sorry, even that's triggering to men. Triggering meaning, man gets sexually out of control, then they will jump these women, and then we're going to have fitna or chaos caused by the revenge that comes from, because these are honor and shame societies. And so you would have, I used to read through this, and they would make legalistic arguments as to why the face, for instance, should be covered. It's the eyes, it's the lips, it's the forehead, and then they get this consensus on let's cover the face, and then it was the ankles, and then it was the hands even. Because you see in countries like Saudi Arabia, they have to wear gloves, and I'm talking about like 35 degrees, 36 degrees centigrade heat, where women walk around covered like walking tents. And all that was then justified in the name of protecting women and protecting society from chaos that could be unleashed. And it was even more, it became even more extreme where it doesn't matter if the woman is covered from head to toe. It's her sound, like women talking, women laughing, or high heels, the tap of the heel, even that was triggering. And then it becomes even more extreme. And some of them, they delve into, but what about her scent? So women are not allowed to wear perfume, or because, that can, drive you guys to collective insanity. So then the conclusion is that she has to stay at home. And another conclusion is, her libido, that sexual magic that she has, or witchcraft, or whatever they consider it, that has to be limited by marrying her off as early as possible. So ideally, in the Islamist nightmare, a girl has to have her first period in her husband's home. So Khomeini, when he came to power, he changed the age of marriage to 9 years old. That is legal. And so that's institutionalizing pedophilia from our moral perspective looking in. This regime and the Islamist narrative, it is really, truly, purely evil. And these people don't just theoretically believe in it, they've tried to implement it. But what I find really fascinating about Iran and the people of Iran is that the men of Iran stand with their women. So women can actually go out and protest and organize and reject this and subvert it with the help of Iranian men. I think of Iranian men as really brave, honorable, And, for them to stand, for fathers to stand with their daughters, for husbands to stand with their wives, for brothers and cousins and nephews to stand with their female relatives and against the regime, and therefore against the ideology. And when you look at Iranians in the diaspora, the most emancipated, educated, balanced women from the Middle East, you find are Iranian women.
And over the past few years, when we've seen footage from Iran of women burning their hijabs and dancing around open fires as they kind of throw off these restrictive garments, you notice that they're often being cheered on by their brothers, their boyfriends, their husbands. There are often men at those protests too, and it's incredibly inspiring.
On that note, when you have, this crazy feminist talk in the West that we have, where we have liberal white women doing all things of, to me, like really baffling stuff, you find that the Iranian women look at that and they say, but that's not feminism. To hate menfolk is not feminism. And that's not what we're fighting for in Iran. We're not fighting to hate men. We're fighting this ideology that's putting us in a bad place.
I wanted to ask you about the response of progressives in the West to what's been happening in Iran. Quite a lot of people have commented on the fact that, hundreds of thousands of these people have been hitting the streets every weekend for 2.5 years with their kafirs on to complain about Israel and the so-called genocide in Gaza, etc. And they all seem to have gone quiet over the past 2 weeks and don't seem to care very much about justice in the Middle East anymore. They're certainly not talking about Iran. I was on a march for a free Iran in London this weekend, and it was really well attended, but I couldn't help but noticing that, 95% of the people were Iranian people. And London's got a large Iranian population, and it makes sense they would be on the streets fighting for a free country. But, I was thinking, where are the other Brits? Where are people like me? Shouldn't we be offering more solidarity? And there was just no one, really. So what have you made of that kind of muted, cautious response that we're seeing from so-called progressives over here?
I think the left is being exposed today for what it is. That labels like progressive and justice and liberal and social justice, these are labels that they use to advance another evil agenda, another evil ideology, which is really a resurgence of communism. And I think most Westerners thought that they had defeated communism in 1989. Except that didn't happen. It's just like a hydra. It's come up again with different heads, now working hand in glove with the Islamists. And an emancipated Iran, a truly liberated Iran, is not in the interest of these people who call themselves progressives. Because what do the Iranian people want? When I listen to them and talk to them, they want a functioning economy that's based on growth, a market economy, and therefore capitalist. They'd like to work with Israel and with America and with other Western countries. They're fighting for individual rights. They're fighting for the rights of women. They're fighting for all the things that progressives purport to fight for, but actually want to destroy. For family, for schools that function and transmit knowledge and wisdom. There are hundreds of thousands of Iranians who are converting to Christianity. So progressives, people on the left today with that neo-communist agenda, identity-based, they hate all of that. So they're not going to stand with the people of Iran. They're not going to stand with those who are liberated in Venezuela from the grip of Maduro. And that exposes them. That tells you that from October 7, 2023 until now, all those people who are trying to, milk the emotions of the Brits and the French and the Americans and saying, look at Gaza, look at what they're doing to their children. That was all propaganda. It was all posturing. It was all propaganda directed towards the destruction of Israel. They didn't have the slightest interest in the children of Gaza. And to them, these ideologies, Islamism and communism, the human being is worthless. The means justify the ends. And if killing a lot of people like the Iranian regime is doing and looking away from that in some way advances the end, then they're fine with it. The CCP in China and all the things that China does, these liberal progressives, they never say anything about it. There's a huge Muslim community of about 10 million people that China is currently oppressing. They have them in internments. They're culturally genociding them. Women are being raped and sterilized. They're being re-educated into, and completely, the entire culture is being erased. Where are the progressives? Where are the marches for these people on the streets? Because the CCP, the Communist Party of China, that agenda is consistent with the agenda of groups like Momentum and Corbyn in the UK, but in large swaths of the Democratic Party in the US are now claimed by what we call the Democratic Socialists of America. Zoran Mamdani, the woman who became the mayor of Seattle. I don't know. All the center-left parties in Western countries seem to have fallen into these wrong so-called progressive hands. And so, that's a problem we're facing in the West. Our own people, our own political parties, and our own institutions being used against us.
You mentioned feminists already, Western feminists. You've mentioned them a couple of times. They've got a lot to answer for, in my view. I just wanted to ask you what kind of calculation a Western feminist is making when she decides that, protecting multiculturalism is more important than protecting a 12-year-old girl in Rotherham from being raped. What kind of calculation is being made there? And, if you think back to the Me Too era, when lots of genuine bad behavior was exposed in Hollywood and other parts of the entertainment industry, and that was on the front pages all the time, and Western feminists were all saying Me Too on the internet, and it was taken incredibly seriously. But then when you have something like the rape gang scandal, the same feminists look the other way, they feel uncomfortable, they don't want to talk about it. What's going through their minds when they make those kinds of calls?
What's not going through their minds is the victims, the girls. That's what's not going through their minds. Victims of grooming gangs, victims of female genital mutilation, that's not going through their minds. The victims of the Iranian regime, that's not going through their minds. What's going through their minds? I should say, when I first came to the Netherlands in 1992, and I witnessed just how emancipated women were, how powerful and equal and free. Oh my gosh, I was so impressed. And every person I spoke to, how did this come about, told me it's because of feminism. And so I fell in love with feminism. I thought that's a good thing. Feminism is a great thing. Now, not all things are what they appear to be. I started to look back into what we call feminism in the modern era, which is really very different from those early narratives that were seeking an emancipation of women. In the 18th century, philosophers who were saying, maybe it's time to send girls to school, open higher education up for them, maybe give them the right to vote, maybe treat them equally before the law, maybe give them this, that, and the other, maybe not condemn female sexuality, maybe not call them witches and burn them at the stake. I thought that was feminism, because that was the sort of thing that was happening where I came from. But now when I look at what you and I are calling feminism today, it's just a branch of this neo-communist, identity-based agenda. And women are being used to advance that agenda. We are sacrificial lambs. The feminists who are, putting pussy hats on and protesting Donald Trump's inauguration, they're not putting pussy hats on and fighting against any of the things that actually mean anything to us, which is our physical safety as women. Then for many, many centuries, again, that vast cohorts of women's emancipation people, they fought for women-only spaces where as a woman you could feel safe and you didn't want to be, ogled by men or in any way, shape or form meant to feel you got your privacy with a fellow. It's places as intimate as toilets, locker rooms, a hospital ward. That's now being all opened up for men pretending to be women. And the feminists are not saying anything. If anything, they're on the other side. And so that had me do a double take and say, what is this feminism all about? Right? And they also demonize, roles that are natural. You have your natural role as a man, and I have my natural role as a woman. And the source of joy for women is marriage and it's children. And the so-called feminists over years and years, they've just really demonized, they've cheapened those things. And lots of women who grew up with those narratives, they're now turning their backs on marriage, on motherhood, on being a wife, on, things that many of us find fulfilling. So I don't like the Western feminists. And again, I go back to saying maybe there's a thing or two they can learn from the Iranian women who are strong women, who are real women. And the fact that we want a real relationship, a complementary relationship with our fellow men. We don't want to demonize them.